let me bring you right up to speed of what we're in the middle of. We're in the middle of a series called Divine Mentors. And let me give you the concept behind this. I got the idea from a book that I read by an author named Wayne Cordero, and it's called Divine Mentors. And the idea is that there are men and women in the Bible that have gone ahead of us that want to speak into our lives, and that we'll take the time that we could really learn from their life lessons. And so what we're doing and our team is doing, I'm doing the majority of the ministering in this series, but Pastor Rich from Lake Nona launched off with the story of Joshua, and I've taken, Noah, the story of Noah. I've taken the story of last week of Jacob. Today I'm going to unpack the story of Joseph. And the idea is this: what would these men or women, and I'm going to end it with 2 or 3 ladies in the Bible, and then ultimately end up with the great one, Jesus. What would they speak to our lives today? If they could mentor us, what would they say? And so for some reason, God took their stories out of all the people in the Old Testament and put them in the Bible. And what that does to those stories, it makes them, when you read them, because the Bible is the only book that's alive. The Bible is the only book that can look into your life and speak to you. So when you read about their stories, you're not just reading history, you're reading men and women that are speaking into your life today. I love this verse in the Proverbs. It says this: he who walks with wise men will be wise. How many want to be wise? Like he says, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companions of fools will suffer harm. And so here's what I know. Like if I was a businessman, I would be reading some of Solomon's writings. Like for me as a pastor, I like to read after Moses, because Moses, he was a pastor actually, and he pastored 3 million people. And not one of them was saved. None of them were born again, and he pastored every one of them. It gives me hope, guys. And but the Bible tells us in Hebrews chapter 12, this has been our launch verse. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, there are men and women of God who have gone ahead of us, and they're in heaven. Now, being that they're in heaven, their perspective is going to be different than our perspective. I think when you get to heaven, I think the phrase that we're all going to say when we get to heaven, we're going to go, oh, I get it now. We're so consumed with this life, like it's just all there is. We live forever, everybody, and so this isn't our ultimate destination. It said, let us throw off everything that hinders, and that's what this series is about. We're trying to throw off some things that are getting us off course, that hinders us in the sin that easily entangles. And let us run with, and here it is, perseverance, the race marked out for us. So like if you're going to run this race, it's going to require some perseverance. And so hopefully through these 9 or 10 weeks that we unpack these Bible characters, we're going to give you some tools so you can run with perseverance and with some consistency. Today, I want to unpack, the last time I shared on this series, I talked about Jacob. And I want to talk about one of his sons today. This is the great-grandson of Abraham, the grandson of Isaac, the son of Jacob. And I want to talk about the most famous one of his sons. It's a guy named Joseph. And if you know the story of Joseph, Jacob had 12 sons. Joseph was the 11th son. And Joseph's life did not go the way he thought it was going to go. And so I want to dedicate this service to anybody here that your life has not gone the way that you thought it was going to go. And this is going to be serious. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to laugh. I'm going to tell some stories. But it's also, we're going to have some serious moments here. Because I know there are people that are here today and life hasn't turned out the way that you wanted it to turn out. Your dream that you had for your life, you're not living that dream. And you're at a point of quitting and giving up. And I think if Joseph could say anything, I think he would say this. At 17 years old, his life turned upside down. And it was nothing like the dream he thought it was going to come to pass. I think he'd say, don't quit. And I want to dedicate this service to the person here today, because I just know in prayer, I know in getting ready for this, that there are people here that are at the edge of quitting and giving up. And not just on life, but on your marriage, on relationships, financially. You prayed for healing, you haven't received it yet. Your spiritual life is not what you thought it would be at this age. And I know there's areas that we all want to quit. And I know what they are because I pastored long enough. Emotionally, we struggle. Spiritually, we struggle. Like there's got to be more. Relationally, like my marriage isn't what I thought it would be. My relationship with my parents, my children, I thought it would be further along, be better than this now. Physically, like I wanted a healing. I need a healing, but I'm still not completely there yet. And even something financially. Like I'm not where I'd want to be at this stage of my life. And when you read the story of Joseph, it really has to give you hope. Because if I think every family, every family has a level of dysfunction. I mean, maybe it's just our family, but we have dysfunction. And some of you, I see some of your prayer requests. I know you have dysfunction. And I'm just having fun, but every family does. And when you read the story of Joseph, I mean, this should give you hope. I mean, listen, let me tell you the story. He was Jacob's favorite son, which is probably wrong to have a favorite. Remember the days of, this was date me a little bit, but when I went to Sunday school when I was a kid, we had flannel graphs. I can vividly remember the teacher standing up there and putting Joseph up there with the coat. She put the coat of many colors on him. He was Jacob's favorite, and he told this dream, and somewhere along the way he wanted to quit. He had, because from the time he received his dream, here it is, guys, until the time it was fulfilled, are you ready? 22 years of a gap. And that's what we're going to talk about, that gap today. I've had moments in my life where I wanted to quit. We had some pastors, and really from all over last week, came in and spent some time with our team. On Tuesday, a bunch of them came, but before that, a few of them came and spent a week with our team, and I would spend the mornings with them early, and I talked to them, and at the end of the one session, I said, hey guys, I don't want to talk anymore. Just ask me any question. Just talk to me about anything you want to know about pastoring and in ministry. And one of them said, hey, have you ever wanted to quit before? I said, yeah, yesterday. I quit every Sunday. I just pick up again on Monday. But we've had moments in our lives we wanted to quit. I was thinking about this church. Here you are today. You see it what it is today. But with different locations and multiple services and over 1,000 people a year getting saved in our services. But it didn't start there. Only a few of you remember the days when we started Indian Trails Middle School. And none of you were there. And we would go to the school, and literally some weeks the air conditioning wouldn't work. And people would be there, they'd be hot. Some weeks the air conditioning would be so cold that, this is the truth, I'm not exaggerating, we would hand out blankets to people. We had a blanket ministry. We brought in portable heaters. We'd have heaters going on in the middle of summer in this cafeteria. It was so cold. There would be services. I'm not exaggerating. Remember the projectors? Now they're all mounted, but back then they were portable. And one of the musicians would kick it, and the words would go off on this wall. They're supposed to go over here. The sound would go every service. And I would drive home from there saying, I can't do this anymore, Lord. I can't do this, because every week back then, I needed to prove to people that we could do it. See, back then you didn't know me and you didn't love me. Now I know you love me, and I know you're going to show up every week, whether we get it a perfect or not every week. But back then, I didn't know that. And so we were struggling to be perfect. I remember driving home one day from Indian Trails down Tuscaloosa Road. I said, God, I'm not cut out for this. Somebody else has to do this. And I remember we've had times, Dean, maybe probably no one else, only us. We were driving one day to a marriage small group. We were leading a marriage. It was more than a marriage small group. We had about probably 30 couples in there, and it was back at our other location, and it was an off night, and we were just leading this small group. And listen, her and me got in a fight on the way to a marriage small group to talk, and I'm leading it. We were arguing about what we're going to cover and who's going to cover what. And the topic was, are you ready? Communication. You know what I'm saying? I remember I was the dean of a Bible school, and we had Bible students every day, and I'd preach to them, like usually 3 classes a day was what my role was, and so 3 hours a day, and day in, day out. And I'd get up there and talk about the faith to future missionaries and ministers. I talked to them about the faithfulness of God and the goodness of God, and you can count on God, and no one knew it, but for 2 years, my oldest child was sick almost every day of her life. For 2 years, and I'd have to stand there and preach the truth of God's word and have that hanging on. And so, yeah, there's been moments. Do you know this? That the average pastor today, 90% of pastors that start in ministry don't finish in ministry. Only 10% do. Do you know 95% of pastors say they're lonely? I'm not. I've got 5 kids and a wonderful wife and a staff that keeps me straight. And I'm still believing God for number 6. And I know she's watching in the back room. You know what I found out? Is persistence wears down resistance. And that's how we roll. But let me tell you the story of Joseph, because I'm sure he wanted to quit. 22 years from when he had the dream is what we're going to pick up on. Genesis chapter 37 and verse 5. This is, by the way, the longest story in Genesis of any of the Bible characters. It takes up more of the space of Genesis than anyone else. So obviously God wanted to speak to us from Joseph's life. It said one night Joseph had a dream. And when he told his brothers about it, here's the deal. I have 5 brothers, 6 boys and 1 girl. And Joseph's number 11 out of 12. Joseph probably got himself in more trouble than he needed to be in. You don't tell your older brothers what he's getting ready to tell them. It says they hated him more, like they already hated him, but now they're hating him more than ever. And here's the mistake he made. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field and tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up and your bundles all gathered around and bowed before me. Big mistake telling your older brothers that. He said, when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, let me back up in here, excuse me. They all bowed before mine. Then 10 verses later, so there have been some time that have gone on. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. And as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. And I want to speak to the dreamer today. Maybe that's you. You're the dreamer. You're not living the life that you thought you'd be living. And this is what they said, come on, let's kill him. Let's kill the dream. Throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. And I think you got to realize you have an enemy that's fighting you and your dreams. And if Joseph was here today and he could speak to our congregation, I think there's a couple things he'd want to mentor you on. Some things he'd want to speak to you about. And I think the first thing that he would say is this. When life doesn't go the way you thought it would. If you're here today and you say, my life is not going the way I thought it would, I think the first thing that he would say is this. Don't give up. I'm 22 years before I had my dream. At 17, 39 when I saw it realized. Just don't give up. And I think a lot of us were there. We're at the point of wanting to give up. Like how much longer is this going to take? And I think a lot of us, what we do is the reason we want to give up. We give up because we're looking at our mistakes and God's looking at your potential. God doesn't judge you guys. He doesn't judge you by your mistakes. God judges you by your potential, everybody. This is some serious stuff. God never consults your past to determine your future. And we have mistakes that we make. We've done some things wrong, and maybe we deserve where we are in life. And maybe you have baggage. But I've got some great news for you. Joseph wasn't purposed, and still the plan of God came to pass for his life. And so many of us were living, like you need to know this. You have God, and God sees your potential. He doesn't see your mistakes. But you have an enemy, and he's called the adversary of your soul. He likes to bring thoughts to you. Another description of him is called the accuser of the brethren. And so this is going to date me a little bit. But some of you remember that little toy we had called Etch-a-Sketch? And you had 2 little knobs on it now. My kids have iPads now, and they got little pins. They can pull them out and erase any mistake they made. But when we were kids, we had to shake it and start all over again. Remember those, everybody? So we had this Etch-a-Sketch. We'd do something and write it, and we didn't like it. We would just shake it, and you get a fresh start. Come on, let me tell you something about your God. He's an Etch-a-Sketch kind of God. You make a mistake, and you've written some things that aren't right about your life. Every once in a while, God just shakes that and says, hey, you get a do-over. But then you've got this accuser of the brethren over here, and he wants to remind you of your mistakes. He wants to remind you of your past. You did this wrong. You did that wrong with your money. You did this wrong with your relationships. You weren't the perfect parent. You didn't raise your kids right. You got angry here. You did this in your relationship. And God is over here saying, come on, I want to give you a fresh start. See, God doesn't consult your past to determine your future. God sees your potential. There was a guy in the Bible, and this is a guy that you're all familiar with. I'm not going to do a story on him, but if I had a longer series, I would. It's the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul, the great Apostle Paul, who wrote over half of the New Testament. You know this one here. And so, but his life didn't start off that way. Paul was considered, we would call him a terrorist today, in line with, and I don't want to get offensive to anybody here, but in line with what we'd consider ISIS or something. When we see those awful stories and read about them and they're beheading Christians, well, Paul was right alongside those kind of people. He was stoning Christians. It was a brutal death. And he stood there and he actually instigated that and made sure it came to pass. Well, let me tell you what God said about Paul, even in the midst of all that. In 1 Timothy 1, Paul said, I thank Christ Jesus our Lord, who has given me strength, like he anointed me, graced me. Notice this phrase, that he considered me trustworthy. God saw something in Paul when he was persecuting the church. God saw the potential on the inside of him. God didn't see him just where he was. He saw him what he could be. Everybody, come on, you need to know that about God. He doesn't see where you are, he sees what you can be. And he said, he appointed me. God appointed him to this ministry. And here it is. Even though I was a blasphemer, I was a persecutor, and I was a violent man. A blasphemer, persecutor, and a violent man. Said, I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance and unbelief. Guys, all I'm saying is don't give up because of your mistakes. I think Paul would say that. If your dream has taken longer to come to pass, well, the worst thing you can do is give up. If you don't quit, everybody, you win. I think the second thing Paul would say is this. Remember that rejection is not fatal. Sometimes you get, and this is like of all the points, I think this is the one that hits home the most with me. This is one that I honestly struggle with even in my life. And I'll tell you a story. I don't tell you the story for pity and so you can say how great I am, none of that sort of thing. But when I was in Bible school, I was ushering him. It was a large Bible school, probably a couple thousand students or so, and so I was ushering him. Back then we had a large team, and we had these little radio earpieces for the walkie-talkies. We had a little thing in our arms, we'd say, and so I could speak into that, and so like your Secret Service, and so this girl, I'm an usher, and this girl walks across the stage, and so I get on there and go, hey, can someone tell me who that beautiful girl is? Now, there's probably 50 ushers and multiple thousands of people in this, we're supposed to be serving. And I say, can someone tell me who that? And someone got over there, said, her name is Dina Fyock. I said, well, I have to meet her. And then all of a sudden, this voice came over there and said, who is the pastor? Who's talking about this stuff right now? And it was silence. And one of my buddies, one of my good, dear buddies, is Jeff, said Norm, and ratted me out. Well, that was my first year in Bible school. Thank God it wasn't my last. And so I didn't date Dina. I didn't know her, and thousands of students. And so finally, I'm talking about her one day, and my roommate says, hey, I think I know who Dina is. My brother-in-law was her youth pastor. And I said, hey, brother, call him up. help me out here. I just have to meet her. Because I know if I meet her, I got her. No, I'm just kidding. And not really. There's a whole nother story there. But it is true, persistence does wear down resistance. And so he called her. He called her youth pastor, her former youth pastor, and said, hey, my roommate, he wants to meet Dina. And so her youth pastor, who knew me, knew who I was actually, called Dina. And this is what he said to her. He says, Dina, there's this guy named Norm that wants to meet you. He's not for you. You're called to ministry. And he said these words. And now 27 years later, like we're way on the other side, so like I'm way past this. But then they were devastating to me. He said, you can't marry him. He's just an accountant. He's not a minister. And my dream was to be a pastor. And what I'm saying is if we're going to walk out the dream, you have to remember that rejection is not fatal. I'm not the only one who's dealt with this. Jesus dealt with this. And in Mark chapter 6 and verse 3, it says, isn't this, like this is Jesus, he's just a carpenter. Like no big deal. Isn't this Mary's son, the brother of James and Joseph, Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense. They didn't just reject him, they were offended at him. There was another time in the Gospels where Jesus, he was claiming to be the Messiah, and they went to him and said, hey, your brother thinks he's the Messiah. And they said, hey, don't pay any attention to him, like he's kind of crazy. Like, just let him walk this out. And they kind of were embarrassed of him. And Jesus said this, a prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home. And so sometimes the people that are closest to you will reject you. Joseph would say, rejection is not fatal. When life doesn't go the way you thought it would, I think Joseph would say this, don't give up even if your dreams don't go as planned. Even if they're like it's not going as planned. And I'm gonna say something. And of all the things that I'm gonna say, this is the one you're not gonna like the most. And I know that. But I'm gonna say it anyways. Is sometimes God doesn't, if you got to go from point A to point B, God doesn't always go in a straight line. Sometimes he zigzags. And here's the reason why. This is what you're not going to like. Any other nation I preached in, they wouldn't have a problem with this, but we're the American church. And here's what it is. God is more interested in your character than your comfort. Because sometimes your dream will carry you places that your character can't handle, and God won't let your dream destroy your life. He's more interested in your holiness than your happiness. Sometimes the very thing that you want, that really you could have, you're not prepared for it yet. Like all that wealth you want until you learn how to steward what you do have now, God can't give you that. Because you might go buy boats and houses and never use it ever for God's kingdom. The very person you want to marry, if you're not ready yet for it, God's not going to let you destroy their life. I'm preaching better than you're shouting. There's 9. I just kind of broke down the story of Joseph into 9 the highlight reel. Let me give you the highlight reel. And here it is Joseph had a dream. I think we all know that. 17, he had the dream. We just read about it. He was betrayed by his family. Like, this is serious business. This is human trafficking, everybody. That's what was happening there. He was sold into slavery. He was faithful in Potiphar's home, but he received favor from Potiphar. Like, he rose to the top. We know the story. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. And again, he walks in to serve, and she wants to have relations with him, physical, intimate relations. He runs out. She takes his coat. Here's what happens to him. He's thrown into prison. And then from there, he was promoted again in prison. And then from there, he was forgotten and betrayed again in prison. And do you know how long he's in prison for? 2 years. 2 years. And then his dream was fulfilled, and he became second in command in Egypt. Now I want to go back here, and I want to look at these. And because there's a season of life, there's times when you're in the middle of your dream, you have to press in. There's times of your life where, man, you're disappointed and you're pressed. And then you press. There's good times, and sometimes there's bad seasons you got to deal with in your life. How many know when Joseph had a dream, was that a good or a bad time? Okay, let's try this again. When I say this and it's good, I want you to clap and go, yes, okay? And when it's bad, we're gonna boo. Here we go. Joseph had a dream. He's betrayed by his family, sold into slavery, faithful, received favor from Potiphar. All right, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, thrown into prison, promoted again in prison. Here it is, forgotten and betrayed again in prison. Here it is, dream fulfilled. Now, sometimes, guys, life zigzags like that. There's seasons where, man, it's just, wow, everything's great. And there's seasons when, like you see this now, we have a great production team. We have a staff that works all week long and put all this together and cameras, and they're working all week, Monday through Friday. When we started this church, there was no team producing anything. The words would be off out of focus. Music wasn't playing right. Sound systems were going out. But sometimes you have good seasons. Sometimes you got to press through when things aren't going exactly the way that you want them to go. Paul said it like this: hold firmly, like in seasons like this, hold firmly to the word of life. And on the day of Christ's return, I will be proud that I did not run the race in vain and that my work was not useless. Paul said later in Philippians, I focus on this one thing, you know it. I forget the past and look forward to what lies ahead. Here it is, there's seasons when you've got to press. There's seasons when, man, everything's not working out the way you thought it was good. That's when you press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize. I think Joseph would also say this: don't give up on your dream if it takes longer than you think it should to come to pass. Like, my marriage isn't where. Can I tell you this? Dean and I are married 25 years in June. Yeah? And can I just tell you, it's better now than it's ever been, but it gets better every year. Because you realize what commitment is. You realize that what it's going to take to have success. And in pastoring, like our church, we didn't start where we are today. Can I just say to you, we are just now, I think, beginning to hit our stride. We are just now in the process of really doing what I thought we were going to do 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I thought we'd be doing. In fact, we plant church, like right now, we're helping a lot of people plant churches. I'm working with younger pastors, and you're allowing me to do that. Thank you so much. I mean, there is not a week that I don't get a phone call from another church or another pastor that's falling apart, wanting to quit and wanting to give up. And because you guys have allowed me to have staff around me and to have people around me, I'm able to help them. And I'm you don't even know it. Sometimes I'm gone for a couple days and helping a church out. And I just want to say, we didn't start there, but here we are there today. And here's what Joseph would say: don't give up on your marriage. Don't give up on the dream of being financially free, on your family, if it's taken longer than you think should come to pass. I'm going to read a verse to you. Another one of these verses. I'm pretty confident no one has this on the refrigerator. And here it is. It's these things God said that I plan won't happen right away. Boy, that's the word I needed from God today. Man, you know that business I started? Hey, it might not start off like everyone else and blow up in a week. You know, the church with the ministry, it's maybe not going the way you want it to go. He said, it's not going to happen right away. And here's 3 words that Christians don't like. Slowly, steadily, surely the time approaches when the vision will be fulfilled. He went on to say this, if it seems slow, do not despair, for these things will surely come to pass. Just be patient. They will not be overdue a single day. That's God. When we did this series, and even the team that's doing parts of it, I talked to him and said, hey, I want you to teach like what you would teach like in a series like this, and I want you to speak to the congregation some life lessons. But I want to have a moment every week where we kind of take the mask off, take off the Christian, coat and all that stuff, and like just have what I call a Starbucks moment. We're going to go sit at Starbucks, and we're going to have a chat. Any of our staff knows this. When I invite them to Starbucks to have coffee with me, it's probably not going to be good. I'm going to have a moment with you that I need to talk and be real straight with you. And I think, Joseph, I just gave you the version would be like a conference message. That's what you're going to hear at conferences, and that's kind of, we all know those things about his life. But I want to dig a little further, and I want to have a conversation as if I were Joseph and you're ready to give up on your dream. What would he say to us? I want to have a conversation like I would if I was sitting down with one of my older kids and giving them a life lesson. And I want to point out 3 things. I'm going to do this in about 7 minutes, and I'll be done, that Joseph would say to you. And remember this, counselors and mentors are 2 different things. A counselor speaks to your past. A counselor speaks to a problem. A mentor speaks to your potential, to your future. So these statements, I'm going to make 3 of them. These are forward-looking statements. We're not looking in the past. We're looking forward. I think the first thing that Joseph, if he was sitting down having a coffee with you, I think one thing he would say is this. You might not be ready for the dream, or the dream might not be ready for you yet. Why is it taking so long? Well, perhaps you're not ready for the dream. Perhaps, you're at a place right now where you're not ready. And don't lose focus on what's important. You're looking for God to do something for you, or God's trying to do something in you. You want all the dream to come true. And God's looking on the inside and said, no, let me do a work in you first, because you're maybe not ready for it yet. Or maybe, perhaps, the place isn't ready for you yet. And God's working some things out. And the Bible would use a verse like this in 1 Peter 1. He'd say, so be truly glad. Like in the context that you're going through a problem, things aren't working out, be glad. There's a wonder, because there's joy ahead. Even though you must endure many trials for say it with me, a little while. Say it again. You must enjoy trials for a. These trials will show you that your faith is genuine. Here's what's happening. It's being tested as fire tests and purifies gold. And we call that a purifying fire. And when you go through a purifying fire, all the impurities rise to the top, and you can skim it away. Now, let me be very clear to you. The dream was from God. The dream God's given you is from God. And can we just say probably 90% of what Joseph went through, a lot of it was self-inflicted? And so let's not get into this theology where God's doing all this to me and God's just, let me tell you something. God will never use anything that he's redeemed you from to teach you with. You need to know that, okay? But we go through these problems and we go through tests and trials, and so many of us just pray that they go away. We forget, what's happening in me? Here it is. That though your faith is far more precious than mere gold, so when your faith remains strong through the trials, it will bring much praise in glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. He's saying, hey, if things aren't coming to pass in your life at the speed you'd like them to, maybe instead of focusing so much on those coming to pass, stop and ask yourself, hey, God, what are you doing in me? Like, what are you working on right now? Here's another thing that I think Joseph would say, and this is going to be a serious moment. Here it is. Resentment will destroy your dream. I think when I read this story of Joseph, and I read it multiple times, and I thought to myself, what incredible restraint. Like, what incredible restraint was it for him when he sat there with his brothers? They sold him into slavery, and probably he had to think to himself, 22 years of my life is ruined because of my brothers. Can you imagine like the thoughts that would be going through your head? Like, dude, man, Potiphar's wife wouldn't have met her if it wasn't for you guys. Wouldn't be in prison, mopping up slop from other prisoners. Like, let me tell you something about the Egyptians. They were brutal people, especially back in that time era. They dominated the world through this sheer, just brutal force. They use intimidation. And I can't imagine what he went through in prison. And he sat there. The dream came true. He's prime minister, second in command of all of Egypt. And his brothers show up. They don't know it's him. And he had all this power. And imagine what he could have done to them. And I thought to myself, what incredible restraint he showed. Because I think what he would say to you is, guys, resentment will destroy your dream. And I get it. Like, forgiving someone doesn't make what they did to you okay. Forgiving someone doesn't make what they did to you not hurt. But forgiving someone who hurts you frees you and them. And I love this verse. It's one of these verses that like for the modern day church, it's hard for our theology, but we can't ignore it because it's in the Bible. And it says this: since Christ suffered while he was in his body, strengthen yourselves with the same way of thinking. It didn't say like you had to be beat and whipped. It says the suffering that he went through was, you had this same thinking that Christ had. And I was thinking, of course, I'm right now thinking about Easter. And that's kind of how I do. I'm like 3 months ahead of where you are in preparing for services. And I'm thinking about the story of Easter, and I'm thinking about Jesus hanging on the cross. And he's been beaten, of course. He's been whipped. He's been spit on. He's been punched. I mean, like so many times in the face, his face is swollen up. His back is bleeding. He's so physically weak, he can't even carry the cross. And he's hanging up on a cross, and they strip him naked in front of his mom and others, which is bad enough if you're an American, but for the Jewish, that's even worse. Jewish people, naked in front of your mom, hanging on a cross, and they're gambling for his clothes. I mean, if you've ever, you hear that, you kind of get mad. Like, you demand justice. You demand that these people pay for this. And if you want to get freedom from unforgiveness, this is the best way I can help you. Jesus did something that if you could adopt this mindset in your thinking, it would change everything about dealing with forgiveness, unforgiveness in your life. And here it is. This is what Jesus said on the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. And someone says, what if they do know what they're doing? Well, I like what Jesus did. Just pretend like they don't know what they're doing. They just made a mistake. They weren't in their right mind. And do you know what this does? This frees you. You think you're freeing him when you don't know you're freeing yourself. And lastly, I think what Joseph would say is this. When tough times comes, remember that God never abandons you. I knew in getting ready for today that there'd be a few people here this would be tough to hear some of this. But what I'm counting on is, what we count on at East Coast Believers Church, is that there would be a holy moment here. There'd be a moment where God showed up. And this is it right here. When tough time comes, we have to remind ourselves that God never abandons us. And why do I have to say this? It's because when tough times, when they come, it feels like God has abandoned you. Sometimes it feels like not only my family, not only my friends, but even God abandoned me. And I think Joseph would say, even when you don't feel like it, remember he is with you. I want to read a few verses to you. I got like 30 seconds. I don't want you writing these down because I can give these to you if you need them. I just want you to hear what God says. When you feel like he's abandoned you, just remember these verses. Let these just speak life to you. Hebrews 13 says this, for he himself said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Matthew 28 says, and you can be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Isaiah 43:2 says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. Jeremiah, because you need to know this, because when you're going through a tough time and your dream, 22 years of ups and downs, it feels like God's not with you, but this is what he said. Don't be afraid of the people, for I will be with you. Jeremiah 1:19, they will fight you, but they will fail, for I am with you and I will take care of you. Psalms 138 verse 9, the psalmist said, if I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hands will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. I know the question comes, God, where are you? Why did you let this happen? I got some great news for you. You remember when tough time comes that God never abandons you.